Greetings everyone, my name is Deadly Mio and today we are going to shed some light on the matter of why I still watch a lot of Rainbow Six Siege gameplay but hardly play it myself anymore these days. Back in 2015 when Siege released, I'm pretty sure nobody would have expected that in 3 years time we'll still be talking about the game. The game had niche product written all over it from the very start. A super tactical shooter that involves a lot of team coordination and requires you to have a strong game sense. How is that ever going to be popular? Well, the first months after the game's launch actually seemed to fulfill that expectation. An average player count of roughly 8,000 and a peak player count of 18,000 in the launch months of December in 2015 according to Steam charts. Keep in mind that's not taking into account the people that were playing the game directly via Uplay. The anti-cheat system was also more or less non-existent. There were bugs and glitches that amongst others allowed you to leave the building as a defender during the preparation phase and eliminate attackers in their spawn. And finally, there were also latency issues that resulted in rubber banding. So the game was basically on track to quickly lose its already small player base. What turned it around? First of all, it is worth mentioning that the actual gameplay is a little different than what first impressions lead you to believe. On top of that, Ubisoft's player-first philosophy, which gave rise to decisions like the release of free maps and operators, constant patches, and cosmetic-only microtransactions, also made a large contribution to the game rapidly gaining popularity and making its way into the mainstream. 2015 was also a perfect time to release a game like Siege. COD players in particular showed first signs of being tired of the futuristic setting as Black Ops 3, the second advanced movement game within the franchise in a row, and in general, hit the market in November 2015. The only major modern FPS game to release in that year was Battlefield Hardline. Despite decent sales figures, Hardline couldn't follow in the footsteps of Battlefield 4, which sold 2.5 million copies during its first sales week compared to Hardline's 1.43 million copies. Hardline generally received mixed reviews and also wasn't able to retain its player base. If we compare the peak player counts in 2015 of Battlefield 4 and Hardline, we'll see that Battlefield Hardline only had a higher peak player count during April and most likely its launch months of March in that year. I say most likely because BattlefieldTracker.com contains no data for Battlefield 4's player count for all months of the game's life cycle before April 2015. In any case, Battlefield Hardline started off with a peak player count of 227,277 across all platforms in March, which decreased to 162,490 in the following months compared to Battlefield 4's peak player count of 134,526. In May, the tables turned when Hardline's peak player count further dropped to 93,120, while the one of Battlefield 4 increased to 158,172. This trend continued, and in December when Siege released, Battlefield Hardline's peak population amounted to 33,244 people, and just to give you an idea of how low that is for Battlefield standards, in March of this current year, almost 5 years after the game's release, Battlefield 4 still had a peak player count of 61,403. This number probably is also influenced by the fact that Battlefield 1 also has a player retention problem, but that's a topic for a different day. My point is, for a lot of players the FPS giants weren't delivering what they expected and Siege had the potential to fill the void that arose. Losing players over time generally is nothing out of the ordinary. Battlefield Hardline just lost them at a more rapid pace compared to other games. This makes it all the more astonishing that Siege could actually gain more players over time and did so with a surprisingly high population growth rate, I might add. In March of this year, Siege hit its highest peak and average player count since release of 176,208 and 83,112.3 people respectively. There are good reasons why Siege is so incredibly popular. The first and most important reason of all is the existence of Tachanka, my deity, and Ying, my waifu. Just kidding. On a more serious note though, matches on Siege rarely play out the same due to the wide variety of operators and their individual gadgets to choose from, the different team compositions that result from the selection of each member of the team, and the broad range of strategies that can be employed with each of those team compositions. Looking at these special gadgets, siege operators are reminiscent of Moba heroes, and much like hero abilities in MOBAs, these gadgets add a lot of depth and complexity to the game. Designing a FPS game on the basis of these principles was a very smart move. In 2015, MOBA games in general had roughly 140 million monthly active users, with 83.5 million of them playing League of Legends alone. I remember seeing a ton of League of Legends live streams during that period of time, even though I wasn't too interested in the MOBA genre itself, because all of my favorite streamers and YouTubers followed the trend. Even if you only had a little bit of interest in gaming, you couldn't escape MOBAs at all at the time. MOBAs are still going strong nowadays. As a matter of fact, the general upwards trend of players has continued. In 2017, League of Legends on its own had 119 million monthly active users, but the genre as a whole has moved a little bit more into the background and isn't dominating every form of gaming-related media anymore. So, seeing how popular MOBAs were and still are, it is not really surprising that Siege players grew very fond of this particular MOBA-esque aspect of the game. Also, the destructible environments in Siege allow for vertical gameplay and add an additional strategic component to the game. Breach walls to distract your enemy while attacking from a different angle, or create tiny peek holes in soft walls to surprise your opponents that might overlook them in the heat of the action. Use box shotgun to destroy the floor below or the ceiling above an enemy to take them out, you name it. Another thing that is really satisfying about Siege is the recoil system of weapons. Having a rough idea of the intricacies of the COD recoil system, and I'm certain the one of Siege isn't any less complex, I think that giving a technical explanation as to why I prefer one over the other would go beyond the scope of this video. But it is a topic worth delving into deep in the future in my opinion. For now, I'll just say that guns in Siege all have a very unique feel to them, and mastering them requires the player to go through an adaptation process, sort of like taming a beast. Recoil control in COD is a lot more intuitive, but also doesn't give you quite the same amount of satisfaction compared to when you do it in Siege. In general, guns in both COD and Siege have random recoil within a certain range for every shot after the first one, and both games provide means for the player to influence the recoil pattern of the gun. COD has the grip attachment, which in most titles of the franchise reduces the view kick, one of the three components constituting the overall recoil for guns within the series. View kick can be defined as the ensemble of yaw, pitch and roll rotations of a player's view with relation to the original point he was aiming at, and the accelerations applied to each of those movements that move the view back in the direction of the aforementioned point, causing the view to shake. Siege provides players with different barrel attachments, namely the muzzle brake, compensator and the flash hider. First off, the muzzle brake is responsible for the reduction of the vertical recoil, in particular of the first shot, and also causes the crosshair to recenter quicker. So it definitely is the attachment of choice for DMRs and pistols, as it'll allow you to fire quick 2 to 3 shot bursts with a negligible amount of bullet spread. It won't help with reducing horizontal recoil, however. This is where the other two attachments come into play. The compensator only affects horizontal recoil, making the in-game description that claims the overall kick is reduced over time during rapid fire somewhat deceiving, as one would expect the muzzle to rise less over time while continuously firing. The final attachment, the flash hider, basically is a compromise between the other two attachments. It reduces the horizontal and the vertical recoil, however not to the same extent as the other attachments in their respective recoil category, and only for bursts of up to 5 shots. So in essence, this system of barrel attachments gives the player a lot more control over the recoil of their gun compared to COD, which is a very welcome addition. When speaking of Siege's recoil system, I have no choice but to mention the sight misalignment issue that resulted from it. This phenomenon, where in rare cases your bullets land in a different spot than your reticle is aiming, has been present now for a long time within the game. The Siege developers have tested predictable recoil patterns on the technical test servers in order to address this issue last year, but the responses of the player base were mixed. Some liked the idea of being able to have more control over their shots by memorizing recoil patterns, others considered a large number of recoil patterns to be overwhelming to learn, and pointed out that maining operators therefore would become much more common. More recently, other recoil changes were introduced on the TTS that didn't abandon the RNG-dependent nature of the recoil, but made sure that bullets always land at the tip of where the reticle is aiming. A more technical description wasn't given in the developer blog post, but it was easy to observe that in the TTS build your reticle would be a lot more static than in the current build of the game, where it bounces around a lot, making the tracking of enemies more difficult. So far, these recoil changes haven't been introduced into the game officially yet, but the direction they're going with the recoil certainly is interesting. This pretty much covers all the things I love about Siege, but it ain't all sunshine and rainbows when it comes to this game. Ha! Get it? Rainbows. On that note, I guess it's time to bring this to an end, but if you're interested in hearing my criticism of Siege, be sure to also check out my next video, which might not take me as long to release as this one, since the script is already prepared. In any case, until next time, keep it classy.